and hosting alongside me is Rena. We are honored to be your MCs for this afternoon session, which we hope everyone is excited for.
There will be another special keynote speech delivered in a moment's notice on global media governance challenges for children as emerging citizens.
Our third keynote speech will be delivered by Professor Dr. Katherine Sarikakis. Dr. Katherine is a professor of communication science with specialization in media governance, organization, and media industries at the Department of Communication of the University of Vienna.
Leading the Media Governance and Industries Research Lab, her career encompasses research and analysis on issues, contexts, actors, and impacts of media and cultural governance and their underexplored interconnections to citizenship, autonomy, and control as they are articulated in the shapes of media landscapes and the relation of citizens at large to dimensions of interlocution.
In addition, she is the founding and twice elected chair of the Communication Law and Policy section of the European Communication Research and Education Association. Currently, she is an elected member of the ECREA Executive Board, as well as the International Council of IAMCR. She's also the co-editor of the International Journal of Media and Cultural Politics.
Our moderator for this keynote session is none other than Associate Professor Dr. Sabariah Mohamed Salleh, an expert in media and literacy.
Dr. Sabariah is a PhD graduate from the University of Vienna in the area of journalism and communication science. She has recently completed research with UNESCO, mapping media and information literacy, MIL, education policy and practices in Malaysia. She has also translated UNESCO's handbook titled Journalism, Fake News and Disinformation to Bahasa Melayu.
A World Health Organization Infodemic Manager and Asian News Literacy Fellow, she has undergone numerous sponsored training sessions by Google, UNESCO, World Health Organization, and the US Department of State, and has been a guest speaker at numerous media and information literacy forums, workshops, and conferences, which is a reflection of her competency in media information literacy. She's also a university supervisor for Fact Check Lab, Malaysia's first independent fact-checking organization.
Prof. Katherine and Sabaria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sudais and Rena. It's my pleasure today to welcome Professor Katherine Sarkakis from the University of Vienna to our conference today. I have had the pleasure of being her student at the University of Vienna, and I believe that all the participants and audience today would really benefit from her talk or her keynote today, which will be focusing on children who are our future citizens of the digital world. Yeah, so Professor Katherine Sarkakis is also actually a senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, and she is currently also working with Professor Sonia Livingston. Over to you, Professor Sarikakis.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this warm welcome. Thank you, Sabaria. Thank you, our chairs, and thank you to the colleagues and organizers of this amazing meeting. When I turned on my computer this morning, I have to tell you, in Vienna, it's 7 o'clock and it's still dark. So it's really difficult to, to start thinking heavy things. But then your music is amazing. And I thought, I want to be there. I don't want to be here in the dark. I want to be with you physically. Well, let's hope, fingers crossed, that this is possible. Yes, very soon. I hope you all keep safe. That's the most important thing. Thank you again for the introductions. They are, of course, wonderful. A lot of these things I have already done, so I'm not all these many things anymore. Having said that, I am with the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa for 3 years as a visiting scholar, and my interest in truly international and global affairs, as well as, of course, European affairs, is what brings me to different places, and that's my interest working with colleagues also. So thank you so much again for the invitation and your attention. See, we have, oh wow, about 90 participants. Thank you so much for that. I hope I can keep your interest in the next several minutes. What I wanted to share with you today are some thoughts about how to push our thoughts, our thinking, and our research a bit further with a bit more focus on an area that I believe has still been under research. There's not enough attention to this area of children. And with children, I mean, of course, any person under the age of 18, anyone who is considered a minor in the eyes of the law. And of course, let me make a statement, if you like, here, that of course, in this presentation, and of course in our research, we did not approach children as a homogeneous group. This is the case because there are many differences, developmental differences, for example, according to age, a different cultural context, a different political, economic, and social context that we're taking into account. And of course, there are children as individuals. So when we discuss children, and when I'm referring to children in this presentation that I'm sharing with you, is really a call to pay attention to this demographic, a social group, which does not necessarily always enjoy the rights of autonomy as the same way that grown-ups, adults do, and a demographic that is actually, when we discuss future, represents, embodies the future of our societies and of course of our democracies. So let me share with you then these thoughts, and I'm very much looking forward to our discussion at the end. So recent years have raised all social questions to be asked anew, while also new questions emerged about the state of our polities, about our social life, about our personal and communal connections. While scholars in the industry stopped referring to globalization as the dominant system of social and economic relations in this past decade, a wave of return to so-called projects of the national and of projects that are related to the aggressive nationalisms have emerged across and within cultures and countries, even within mature, but also even within developing democracies. The withdrawal from analysis of the global as a productive contextualization or as a possible solution to the challenges experienced commonly by citizens, such as the environment, poverty, disenfranchisement, all the way to the erosion of fundamental rights, has been replaced by the attention to the national as a solution to the sense of unattainable agency blocked by the global. Authoritarianism has risen even within mature democratic systems, dictating public policy, whether it is about forced migration and the refugee crisis, whether it is about women's rights to their bodies, even suffrage, all underpinned by the ugly faces of sexism, racism, and the strategically usage of class, to name some of the core ideological components. European experiences, which is where a lot of my research draws upon, of recent years, tick the boxes of all such challenges, indeed retreat from democratic rights. Within this context, communication has been weaponized in different manners, but across borders, across social cultural contexts, and ultimately with the aim of social control as a measure of steering citizens towards acceptance of a status quo that undermines the democratic pillars of human and fundamental rights. Communication as a campaign of misinformation and populism, for example, has determined electoral outcomes. Public health policy and responses to it has undermined journalism. It has endangered the lives of journalists. Communication as a strategy of surveillance has enabled the profiling of consumers, the creation of information bubbles and silos, algorithmic stereotypization of content and users, and has allowed the vicious circle of reinforcement of informational biases. Communication as a weapon has attacked with vitriolic speech and operates in a continuum of digital verbal language and violence and physical violence against women in the public sphere, against minorities, against communities at the margins, against whistleblowers and activists, and has permeated young people's daily diet of content. While a lot has been said about the perils of misinformation, Facebook, surveillance, and so on, little has been said about the informational environment and its suitability for young people, and even less has been said about children. I would therefore like to zoom in this rather neglected aspect of our communications, the role of children as emerging citizens in a communication environment, which presents many challenges about not only personal well-being, but also about the place of citizenship in the communication context of platformization, misinformation, monopolization, and surveillance. Next to the multiple global crises, which Europe has all too vividly experienced, but also the world, such as the financial crisis, humanitarian and refugee crisis, political and integration crisis, health crisis. The other crucial factor of fundamental change has been the very constellation and organization of communication environments. The public sphere has undergone a significant structural change across Europe and across the world, in many places of the world, during this decade as well. Social media gained steadily and clearly not only users and their time to express private habits or to socialize, but also gained new markets, created new audiences, established new habits and behaviors, captured the ways of thinking of young people, and attributed themselves with new functions in the communication continuum of societies. Some social media platforms assign themselves with editorial functions, even when reluctantly, effectively making decisions about content under contestable procedures, unclear standards, and outside relevant juridical institutions. Moreover, non-transparent criteria built in the technological structure in the form of algorithms further obscure the conditions of managing content and carry further human biases. What, how often, and how much comes down to an algorithmic regulator making decisions for millions of users. The second decade of the second millennium finds societies fragmented across political, financial, and even ideological polarizations that express the damaged social contract between the citizenry and its effective leaders. In the 1830s, Tocqueville underlined the importance of the press in political life and as a powerful weapon to promote democracy. Although some researchers doubt the role of classical, established, or legacy media in vigorously promoting democracy on a daily basis, their key role in facilitating democratic processes in democratic societies in times of crisis is essential. Other scholars, such as Muller, say that information media are as vital in crisis as food, water, shelter, and medicine in a democracy. The interplay between media and democratic governance, however, is a lot more complicated and intertwined, because democracy requires active citizens and news media with a mission, news media that provide trustworthy information. Social media give voice to those views that are normally excluded from political discussions in the mainstream media and make it possible for people to find like-minded compatriots, organize protests, movements, support political candidates and parties, says Tucker and others. On the other hand, the openness of social media platforms might be used to foster censorship. Some online platforms providing information freedom can be exploited to silence others. Authoritarian censors use social media to wield online harassment, propaganda, distraction, and denial of services attack, to distort and shut down the information space, again, quoted by Tucker. After all, the use of social media to define and influence public opinion, pioneered by non-democracies for authoritarian ends, even though now they affect political life in the world's democracies. According to Statista, the February 2021 edition, the number of social media users around the world has grown from 0.97 billion in 2010 to 2.96 billion in 2020. And this number is expected to continue growing and grow to 3.43 billion monthly by 2023. Young users in European countries in particular are more likely to get news from social media feeds than older age groups. This development affects what news means to young people, as most of such news consumption occurs incidentally. And as research shows, social media users are less likely to proactively seek out news, preferring instead to stumble upon current events while browsing social media for other reasons. In other words, young people, the most active social media users, are living in a paradigm where news finds them with no intention of their own to find the news. And the news is presented to them among other types of content and sometimes in an indistinguishable manner. Social media are quickly becoming the primary source of information for many people globally. And when it comes to political information, people who use social media tend to recall the content. They have the potential to learn from the information received, although the knowledge they acquired has a short-term effect. The content does not necessarily provide a full objective picture of events, of what is happening. So the difficulty distinguishing between accurate and fake news increases, especially for younger internet users. Some states try to control and regulate false or sensitive information. However, the measures taken are sometimes very controversial, sometimes in conflict with many democratic values. A solution could be adequate citizens' preparation, especially through media literacy and by teaching media literacy to younger citizens. Still, this kind of solution requires that we pay attention and we put the weight of responsibility on the individual shoulders of young people and the teachers and sometimes also their families. It is a little bit of Goliath, David and Goliath game. When we talk about children as citizens, what does this mean? Who is a citizen? A citizen is a person, a status which people gain because they live in a specific community. Marshall argued this definition, and people with this status do not only have the same rights, but they also have the same duties. However, this is a limited view of citizenship, but this is the view that underpins the legal systems around the world. Now, an expanded understanding of citizenship is that where rights are understood as spheres of legitimacy and agency, and these would be the political dimensions of citizenship, which can be voting or running for office, economic dimensions of citizenship, which is the ability and the capacity to have access to material resources to exercise citizenship, social and cultural dimensions, which refer to social rights, such as healthcare, for example, and cultural rights, such as the right to be educated in one's own language, for example, the right to have access to one's cultural background, the right to express oneself. These dimensions derive from the work of Ruth Lister. And when we are exploring social groups in society, and we want to assess to what extent our democratic values and democratic practices reach them and allow them to make best use of democracy, as it were, these are the best dimensions to look out for, and these are the best standards in which we can assess the degree of inclusion in a society, even when political rights such as voting or running for office are not available. Other rights alone, by the definition of being human, can provide a degree of rights and a degree of inclusion and a degree of acceptance, and of course, a degree of care by society for these groups. Now, if you think about the minors, if you think about this demographic and social group of people under the age of 18, certainly in most countries, they do not have the right to vote. In Austria, for example, children can vote at the age of 16, and they have the right to make independent decisions about their health at the age of 14 without requiring the approval of parents. So you see, rights can also be claimed at different ages. Having said that, these rights they correspond to different dimensions of citizenship, and they don't have to be linear or hierarchical. And this is an important dimension to keep in mind when we think about the ways in which young people today form identities, whether political or cultural, sexual or other, form identities in a world where the communication environments are intrusive in many ways. The communication environments are largely based on platforms, and they provide content that is very, very often indistinguishable in terms of genre from one to the other. Finally, we need to bear this in mind when we think about young people and children growing up in societies where surveillance, whether state or commercial surveillance, is something that they have to negotiate against or with since the day they're born. This is the first generation where everything that a human being experiences is traceable, digitally traceable. And we do not understand, I don't think we understand completely the consequences and the ramifications of such a weight, such a burden. So children are not always recognized as citizens due to the fact that they do not have the right, for example, to vote, or that they cannot be accountable, held accountable for their actions. And there are two contrasting viewpoints. There's a growing demand for an awareness of children's citizenship, and there are initiatives to promote societal awareness. As proposed by Roche, for example, the demand that children be included in citizenship is simply a request that children be seen as members of society too, with a legitimate and valuable voice and perspective. Similarly, other scholars such as Willow define citizenship for children as a right to recognition, respect, and participation. Lack thereof can be regarded as an obstacle to children's development and future civic participation. A contrasting point of view on citizenship for minors is rooted largely in the notion of rights and responsibilities that citizens are usually expected to exercise. But again, as I discussed, this is, I would argue, a rather limited approach to citizenship. Drawing from discourses such as based on Rousseau, for example, children are seen as innocent and vulnerable, in need of protection, including in need of protection by the media, in particular news, audiovisual, television news, which often transmit negative and disturbing news reports. Most research on children and news media concentrates on the effects of violent news content on audiences. Prior studies suggest that violent or disturbing news content has negative effects on children. For instance, with the rise of sensationalist news stories that tend to blur news and entertainment genres, and children of all ages thus may be regularly confronted with highly distressing and violent accounts of murders, catastrophic accidents, war, and other suffering, as says van der Molen. Negative emotional response and reaction to frightening news can be reduced, is the argument, through active parental mediation in younger elementary school children. However, children who reported talking about the news with their parents generally reported more intense emotions. The same study by Buisgen and van der Molen and Sondage says that restrictive parental mediation, for example, setting very strict rules about children's television viewing, that was a study in 2007, and it has a quite different, of course, context than in 2021, still relevant to how we approach children's relation to media and the news, made children more fearful and worried about the news content. This is in agreement with research on parental mediation as an ineffective method of mitigation of negative media effects. Therefore, we see that the attempt to put the responsibility of a so-called healthy media environment on the shoulders of individuals such as parents is not necessarily effective. While it is a legitimate concern for young children, minors of school age not only lack age-appropriate news, but in studies they have expressed a clear need to be informed about current affairs, as Lemish and Alan Tirosh tell us in their study in 2014. And treating children with respect can, of course, increase and support their competence in the world and understanding media and understanding information and content that they consume. News reports around the world have consistently presented results of studies demonstrating stable decline in news consumption by young people. So this is a story that continues for over a decade through various studies. A similar concern is that young generations today are becoming less engaged in politics, more indifferent, more self-centered, and this subsequently might threaten the stability of democracy around the world. These studies also go on from the mid-90s to the end of 2000, the first decade, continuously. Of course, when we look at today's public sphere and the role of minors and children in it, we see that the definitions of politics and the definitions of what engagement in politics means is quite different from possibly the ways in which scholars or the adult generation, as it were, has understood politics to be. The children lead global social movements at the moment, and they are portrayed in the news in many different ways. They are being even attacked by the adult world through hate speech even and vitriolic speech. So it is, we see that children exercise political dimensions of citizenship, and they make the news themselves. Now, the news is an essential element of active citizenship. Adolescents' news media consumption positively predicted civic duty, civic efficacy, neighborhood connections, and civic participation, as Boyd in 2011 in a study is telling us. Authors also suggested that youth and young people who regularly follow the news, people from the ages of 15 to 25, regardless of the medium, have been found to be more active citizens. This kind of information, this kind of data is backed by a significant increase in voter turnout. For example, in 2019 European elections, where the Eurobarometer survey in 2019 says that it's shown to be stemming from a greater participation among younger people. It is no coincidence, of course, that the most recent State of the Union in the European Union by its president called for more inclusion, more attention, and more involvement, making sure that we involve more young people in Europe. So much like while skipping schools on Friday, as it were, to voice a political opinion on climate change, European youth, for example, does in fact practice their citizen rights, namely the right to express an opinion, to have that opinion taken into account, and as it is established also in Article 12 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The convention offers also its own concept of children and childhood. They are regarded as legal subjects. They hold rights since the moment they are born. However, the convention does not necessarily offer an agreed understanding of children's citizenship and does not offer an agreed understanding of different ways of practicing citizenship in an international context. This is again another way in which the adult world has been has stayed behind, and I think it's important that we take some lead from what's happening out there in the world globally, in movements led by children, reviewing the notion of children's citizen status. Lister proposes to discuss citizenship of minors not as an extension of adult rights and obligations, but rather accept that their practice of citizenship makes them citizens de facto, even if they're not complete de jure citizens. This paradigm can be extended to the influence of mainstream news media on the status of children as citizens and vice versa. Now, looking a bit closer at what it means to be a child and to consume news, and what kind of news is being produced that is suitable to children. I would like to take a few minutes to discuss what children say to this setting, this context, and these experiences that I have just referred to. So children's quality of life should be a global priority. In many ways, it is around the world. It is reflected actually in research initiatives and policy making and ongoing societal developments that aim to prioritize minors' well-being and prosperity. At least we have legal instruments, or we have policy initiatives, and we have at least the public debate around it. Whether or not we implement as an adult society, global society, whether or not we implement these ideas, the initiatives, or we use the instruments to their maximum capacity is a different conversation, perhaps. Nevertheless, the global societal priorities seem to be in the right place. Now, few news programs have been historically designed for children aged 6 and upwards. The idea of a passive child in front of the television that dominated the public consensus in the 50s until the 70s at least, was later gradually abandoned for another approach where the child was deemed to have internal skills with capacities and motivations from its own interior, as says Fuenzalida. In 2015, the majority of children, about 74% between the ages of 5 to 15, access news media through the internet on their personal computers and tablets, against only 38% who listen to the radio, and these numbers are falling. For example, An older study, an earlier study conducted by Livingston and Bowell found that children had almost no association with newspapers, and they were barely mentioned as an engaging medium. Newspapers were seen as a specific way, only liked on occasion, for example, reading about sports or other kinds of popular culture. In the 1990s, Katz, 93, suggested that children are prone to absorb information on the go in fragments, and much of the young people's exposure to news may be accidental rather than purposeful, might be distracted rather than concentrated. Now, other studies have shown that news for children needs to be presented in a different framework than adult targeted news. Constructive journalism, for example, was shown to elicit fewer negative emotions in children aged 8 to 13 years old, and inspired readers to engage with the topic presented. This is research coming out by study by Clemens and al. On the other hand, children have comprehension challenges with the usual news programs due to the often complicated language of the news, as well as their other and smaller horizon of experience. On the other hand, public broadcasters are indirectly responsible for educating the youngest in our society. For this reason, it is necessary to promote children's interest in the news and their understanding of news, as well as to introduce them to the use of news sources. More recent studies suggest that children often proactively seek information in news on topics that are of interest to them, and they're even eager to express their own opinion about them. Earlier studies suggested that children who watch more news are more knowledgeable about the political world, demonstrate greater curiosity towards news, and are more motivated to actively pursue additional information. Research tells us increasingly that what children think. Alan Tirosh's findings of 2014 suggest that children indeed want to get the news, but on their own terms, lightheartedly, with a positive framing, and with regard to their personal world. The study was conducted with Israeli scholars growing up in a conflict zone in a complex political context. This study opened up a discussion on the methods and tools used to study children's media preferences. Rob, in 2017, a few years later, in the study News and America's Kids, explored how young people perceive and are impacted by the news. Contrary to the belief that minors get their news from television, it was shown that children today access news from online sources. Friends and family play an important role as sources of news too, and children also tend to trust news more when they are being discussed with those close to them. Less than half of the children in that study reported being able to distinguish between fake news from the real news. And interestingly enough, children express lack of confidence in their ability to evaluate news. At the University of Vienna, we have been running a study among scholars exactly about what it is that they understand as news and what does news say to them. This study is at the moment the stage of writing up and evaluation. And what we did was to put together focus groups across the metropolitan area of Vienna from schools that represent the population in Vienna, the socio-economic and the cultural context of people in Vienna. And we have run focus groups with over 100 school children, ages 8 to 15, excuse me. And what we find is that a lot of the things that the children have been telling us can be found in the previous studies. So they confirm previous studies about the ways in which children find the news. they mostly find the news with their parents in their environments, and mostly they have, of course, varying degrees of understanding and knowledge about the world, which seems to be dependent on the socioeconomic context within which they find themselves, and related to cultural capitals and the environment. A lot has to do with the environment of the school within which students, scholars spend most of their day. Some interesting things, however, that derive from this study are, for example, that children say that the news is scary, but also that the news can keep you safe. They say that the news the children want news content that includes children, because currently they say the news is very negative and frightening. But, is the logic, if the news includes more children, then the news will be better, because the world will be better. When we asked why is this the case, they said because adults would care more, because adults have children. Children also want news about issues that affect children. Some of them have talked about where there should be news about where there's a new park to go and play, for example. But the news is associated largely for children with bad news, with catastrophes, with bad politics. And still, in an irrelevant kind of manner of age, children have the capacity to understand that the immediate world around them, such as a house burning, for example, and the bigger world are connected. And these connections do appear in the news, but they do appear in a catastrophic way. And they say, when we ask them if the news is something that is to be prepared for adults or children, they say that news is for children also, because also they said they consume it with their parents. I would like to finish this presentation today, these thoughts with you, with a call, if you like. I would like to, if you like, translate this kind of research, and the theories that we work with, the research we do, the thinking behind a lot of the issues I raised today. I would like to connect it with broader practical policy, if you like, a policy agenda in the national global environments, as part of the global challenges and the new norm that this conference is focusing on. And seeing that there's a lot of attention in the bridging between the world of practice and the world of research. I'm very much personally interested, and this is how my work has been shaped, into the role of science and the role of research into bridging these two worlds, and into translating some of the elements that we work with in science into actionable areas. So I have 1, 2, 3. I have 3, yes, action points, as it were, or missions, which I have shared previously in a report with the Austrian Public Service Broadcaster, the ORF. I was commissioned to put together a study on the educational function of the public service broadcaster. what I, however, developed here is not simply a matter of a public service broadcaster. Indeed, there are three mission points here, which are, to my thinking, important for any actor and institution which has a public service mandate, even private media, to consider carefully. So the first mission is countering anti-intellectual and toxic political cultures. The seeds of anti-intellectualism have been planted for decades, not simply with the production of commercial entertainment. Anti-intellectualism has become an increasingly core message in the policy surrounding media and culture, but particularly has accompanied the transformation of social institutions with a task to provide for the betterment of the knowledge base of society, predominantly education, higher education, public media, as well as basic education. Rediscovering, therefore, revisiting and strengthening the position of cultural leadership and mentoring is arguably necessary in the era of demagogic informational manipulation and political fragmentation. The second mission would be, for me, the enlarged thought as public service journalism, which can take place in all media. One should argue for an obligation, even by private platforms, including and in particular of social media, to contribute to the expansion of public service content, in addition to other kinds of content, to strengthen service to the public in communication, information, and education. So journalism, as commonly and predominantly practiced, leaves a lot to be desired. If attention is given to the question about the impact of journalism on civic engagement and citizen empowerment, especially emerging citizens, as minors are, and indeed our social well-being, then long-held assumptions and norms in traditional journalism practices, coupled with the rapid dissemination of fake and check news, then it is clear that we have a glaring gap to fill. So for a start, the dominant journalism paradigm is driven by attention to crisis and catastrophic depiction of events, which are largely presented decontextualized and as part of a series of endless negative news. Now, this approach is not applied homogeneously, of course, across all subjects, but it tends to single out distant others as victims or bearers of catastrophes. The long-held critique of the news operating under colonial view of others through the lenses of exoticism, danger, disaster, or bemusement has drawn attention to information distortion and imbalances, discriminatory sentiments, and public disengagement. And journalism is also led by events and what appears to be at most geographical and perceived cultural proximity, creating automatic hierarchies and rankings of newsworthiness. All these crises that we have been going through have demonstrated very clearly that news offered a severely limited narrative about the causes, effects, and solutions about them. They promoted a negative agenda about other people, about other nations, about countries, and it pathologized a systemic failure, both at the levels, for example, of migration and the inability of political elites to design and commit to policies which safeguard social state and public assets. Third mission is practicing the politics of care for future generations. The existence of children-dedicated channels does not cover the sophisticated needs of children. How does inclusivity and justice figure with young audiences? And what do we know about children's interest in world affairs? Studies found that children designing their own fictional programming make social justice and inclusion a priority in the underpinning principles of content provision. They give attention to things like something for everyone. Children also show an interest in news as high numbers of audiences reach out to trusted news sources to make sense of this world. Studies have shown that children turn to news for information, and this need is not satisfied. you are aware of recent cases with examples of young children questioning politicians, both in the US and now in Germany, in recent months in Germany, refer to the construction of stereotypes, segregation of communities, and so on. I would like to finish by saying that the work of democracy is incremental and of course not easy to measure, it's not of immediate effect, but it requires a sustained politics of care for societal well-being and a stable look to the future. Learning to do democracy is directly connected to the very core of sociality of human beings. Children's programming, children-friendly informational content must therefore be revisited in the context of social and political transformation, taking into account where children and young people are today, in which media worlds, traditional linear TV, online platforms, gaming, and for what purpose. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sarikakis. I really enjoyed your keynote speech and how you explain about how children has been marginalized in terms of research about them and how about the challenges that they face in maneuvering the media world, and how news is not prepared for them, and also the challenge in which that they actually seek news which interests them, but we don't know what interests them. Okay, so we do have a few questions, Professor, and it's in the chat box. So the first question is, children's media as an area of study is rather underdeveloped, and media contents are therefore constructed from adults' points of view, hence adult interpretation of childhood. What lesson can we learn from your research regarding this? This is
thank you so much.
By Associate Professor Jamaluddin Aziz.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues, and thank you for that. Yes, what can we learn? I think there are two lessons here to be learned. One is that the era of running the show, adults running the show, must end at this point. Recently, there was actually an article on The Guardian that was asking whether children should have the right to vote. If you were to ask this question even 10 years ago, the automatic knee-jerk reaction would be no, because we adults know better what to do and we know better about children. Now, the second thing is, and I'll come back to that because it is not a question of either or, I think. The second thing we need to do is to coordinate research, even if this research is a small scale in our constituencies. And I'm interested in whoever wants to work with me to do that, please get in touch to find out what is that children want, what do they think of the news, and what is it that they want to see in the news. We seem to have an input from children that says similar things. But what I wanted to say is that we seem to be thinking typically adult style in polarizations. So on the one hand, we say children are innocent and they need to be protected. Or on the other hand, now we say, no, children know everything about technology. We don't need to protect them. They're savvy. This is not true. Neither of the two things is wrong and neither is true at the same time. They connect and they coexist. So we do have a responsibility of care towards children, but not in a way of being patronizing, but in a way of guiding and supporting. Yeah, I'm trying to be as quick as possible. I realize it's 7:50.
One more question, Professor. Social media really affect badly, especially towards children. Some web designers that work from this social media company have opened up that based on their own research, social media can bring negative effect towards children. Is there something that the authority can do about it, and what we can personally as an adult take action? How can an adult take an action into this?
It says from this social media company, is it a reference to a specific company?
Maybe it's a general, social media platforms.
Right, okay. So I think, yes, this is another excellent question here, because the design of technology is what actually channels and how it directs children's interface connection with technology. So there are two elements here. The most important at this point is technology design that does not work as a surveillance over children's data and information, that proactively, this is important, proactively protects their privacy. And the other element is that social media platforms should have also an on-the-spot educational role, which means that they explain at each point in language so children understand what it is they're doing. This does not mean that we're creating environments of informed consent. There's a whole different discussion about this, but at least we work towards a more equitable dialogue with children at the design of the technology. There's two more. One more, what's your advice in terms of ethical considerations when doing research? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for that. Yeah, we need one more hour for the ethical considerations, but this is, I'm not going to take an hour, no worries. But I think I'm going to say it in like 1.5 sentences. And this is, we do work research with the children and not on the children. And coming from, of course, I have to say, a feminist standpoint position is that we social scientists have an obligation towards our subjects. So when we do research with children, then we offer something back, meaning we offer not just the results and the findings of our work, this is the minimum, but we offer something back in the form, for example, of further information, more education, clarifying things for them, and taking their voices further down when they need to be heard, policy making in the policy making circles, for example.
Thank you so much, Professor Katherine. I wish we have more time with you, actually. There's so much more to hear from you.
Thank you.
We do have one photo session. So if everybody could turn on their cameras, and then we could take a picture of everyone with you.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the technical team, can you please take over for the picture taking session? Is it done? Hold on, yeah.
It's done?
I'm not sure, actually. I think so. Is it done, the technical team? Okay, done, it's done.
Done, yes. But I want to say a big thank you. This is so amazingly, beautifully organized. Thank you so much for this so important questions. I wish I was there to meet you in person. I would say, as I said, my invitation, I'm very interested in expanding this work with colleagues around the world. If there's interest among your community, let me know. It's not that we have funds yet or anything. We're doing the work ourselves. You know how it is, social sciences. But yeah, so thank you so much. I'm looking forward to learning from you.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to work with you, Prof. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Katherine Sarikakis, for that outstanding keynote. And of course, thank you to Associate Professor Dr. Sabaria, Mohamed Salleh, for guiding this wonderful session. And we'd like to thank all participants for taking part in the photography session. And we will now be moving towards the workshop sessions for day 2, which will begin shortly.
There are 5 breakout rooms that are open for each respective workshops. The first workshop, which is the Google Smile workshop, will however be conducted tonight, whereas the UNICEF workshop will be happening in a moment's notice and will be conducted in a separate Zoom call, corresponding to the link that was sent by our committee member via email post-registration. If you have pre-registered for those workshops, please feel free to leave the main session and join your respective workshops.
This afternoon, we will be having a workshop on developing visual communication skills through Adobe InDesign. Besides that, we also have the secret of effective television broadcast presentation, and finally a workshop on the factors for effective interpersonal communication. The respective breakout rooms will be open shortly in this Zoom session. For those who are not involved with the Google Smile and UNICEF workshops, feel free to join any workshop of your liking by joining the respective breakout rooms.
However, if you are unable to do so or prefer to not join any of the workout rooms listed for this session, please do not leave yet, as we have something else set up for you. There will be an exclusive video seminar on investigative journalism going behind the headlines by courtesy of the Asia Pacific Institute for Broadcasting Development.
Yeah, thank you, Rina. Participants, you may start entering your breakout room sessions now.